Hi, in this lesson we're going to be showing you how to mimic the tilt shift effect. Basically, the tilt shift effect kind of makes your photo look like a miniature toy village. When you're shooting photos for this type of project, you're going to want to consider taking your pictures from an angle high up, looking down, so that the subjects and the different people maybe walking around would be smaller. So for this one, I've taken this picture in a downtown area from high up, looking down. And I'm going to begin by just duplicating my background photo, which I like to do just in case I make a mistake. It's easy to fix. The next step would be boost the color. So I'm going to add a hue and saturation adjustment layer. And I'm going to saturate this photo a little bit more so that the colors really pop out and make it look more like a toy. Next, I'm going to go ahead and apply my blur filters. So I'm going to go back to my photo, then I'm going to go to the filter, blur, and choose tilt shift. Okay, automatically it applies it. And over here I have some controls, and over on the side panel I have some of the same controls. I can go ahead and drag on these little handles to adjust where I want the blur to show. So in this case, maybe I want to push it down a little bit. So to achieve this tilt shift effect, you really want to have a thinner band across the middle. And then you can also adjust this on how much blur or how little blur you want. Over on the sidebar, you can also decide how much blur or how little blur that you want. There's some other sliders here that you can consider as well. So there's distortion, there's light bokeh, so this makes it brighter so you see little white areas pop up, which I don't necessarily need that, or the bokeh color. Down here we have the light range. So you see how it's affecting the color of the sky. And I'm choosing a little bit of a darker color. When I'm happy with it, I'm going to go ahead and press OK up on the top. And it's applying my filter. Last, just to kind of draw your eyes to the center, I'm going to add a vignette. So I'm going to go ahead and use the paint bucket tool and choose black, put that on that layer, and then I'm going to reduce the opacity to make it a little bit more subtle. Next, I'm going to choose a soft, round brush, and I can adjust my brush size with the bracket keys, and I want it nice and soft too. So I would set the hardness to 0. Then I could go ahead and brush away in the center. And this also kind of helps to make the colors pop. And that's about it. When I'm done, I can go ahead and flatten my image, and I'm finished. Now let me show you one more example. This one was taken in a train station from the upper level looking down at all the people. And when you have lots of small people, it makes for a great subject. Once again, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate my background, just in case I make a mistake. And I'm going to saturate it a little bit by adding a hue and saturation adjustment. Once again, to make it look a little more colorful and toy-like. Going back to my layer of the scene, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to apply my filter. Now this time I'm going to choose an iris blur, which is very similar to the tilt shift, but instead of doing a band across the middle, it's more of a circular shape, just because the way that this is laid out is just a little bit different than the previous scene. And then I'm scooching this over to where I want it to focus on. Once again, adjusting the amount of blur. And you can also tweak the side shapes too. So if you want to make it more oval shaped or make it rounder, and you can adjust over here on where exactly you want the blur to be affecting it. Okay, and then once again over on the sidebar you have some sliders. So you notice when I do the light bokeh, it adds some white or the bokeh color or the light range. Once again, it kind of gives it a little bit more of a toy-like effect. And when I'm finished, I can press OK. One more time, adding a black vignette. Reducing my opacity. Choosing a nice round, soft brush. And it really draws my eye towards the people that look very toy-like. Lastly, I'm going to go ahead and flatten my image, and I'll save it as a JPEG. So I'd love to see what you can come up with this technique, so be sure to post your photos to the platform. Right now we're going to be doing a lesson with creative and selective blurring effects so that we can imitate a fake depth of field, and you can decide which place of the picture that you want to focus on. So here I'm going to be starting with a baseball, and on my top layer I have just the baseball itself, and on the bottom layer I have a close-up picture of the baseball taken with a macro. And what I'm going to be doing is making a selection of the baseball to put on top and then blurring one of the levels. So starting with the baseball, I'm going to make a selection around. So the best tool in this case would be to use the elliptical marquee tool. So I'm going to select that, and then I'm going to click and hold down and drag around my baseball. And of course, my first try I'm not going to get a perfect circle. So I'm going to go over here into select and transform my selection so that I can tweak my circular selection around the baseball, just so. And I think in this case, if you can't get it quite right, it's better to get a little bit less than you need of the baseball because it won't show up as much than more. So I can just go around my little corners. And just tweaking it. And then when I think I've got it pretty good the way that I like it, I'm going to press the check mark. And then over here, there's the refine edge. I'll click on that so I can see a little bit better what my selection is. So it's okay, but over here on the side, I have a little bit extra that I don't need. So there's some tools over here where I can shift these. And I think pretty much you just have to play around with them. And you can maybe like feather the selection a little bit and smooth it down. I still feel that there's too much over here. So I'm going to go back out and maybe try it again. Because I see that there's some extra over there that I don't want. And like I said, it's better in this case to select a little bit less than you need than more. Okay, so I'll try this again, and then I'll go back over to the refine edge where I can see it. So this way I feel a little bit better about it. And then once again, I'm maybe just going to feather the edges just a little bit. And then I can press OK. So now I have my selection. But what I want to do is to knock out the background. I don't want to knock out what's in the circle. So what I would do is do select inverse. And I'm going to be deleting everything else around it. So I'll press delete. And then I can do Command D to deselect. So now I have my baseball on the top, and then I have the background over here. I don't want my baseball that big, so I can do Command T to do edit transform, and I'm going to make my baseball smaller, and I'm holding the shift button down to constrain my proportions so I don't get a lopsided baseball. So I kind of push it down to about the size that I want, and then I can press the check mark to say, okay, I like it. And then over here on my background, what I think I'm going to do is add just a Gaussian blur. So I'm going to go down, I'm going to go to the filter, and then I will choose blur and Gaussian blur. And then I can adjust how blurry I want it to be and just fiddle with that until I like it. And then I can press OK. And then the other thing that I like to do is add a little black kind of vignette with a little spot of light in the middle. So I'm adding a new layer by pressing the new layer button. And then I'm just going to go into my paint bucket tool and make sure that I have black chosen, and I will paint bucket the black. I'm going to go over here, I'm going to reduce my opacity so that it's pretty low. So I'm going to say here maybe about 25, 26%. And then what I'm going to do is choose the eraser tool, and I've got a nice soft brush, a big large brush, and then I can always adjust my brush with the bracket tools to make the size bigger or smaller. And then I'm going to make sure, right now I think I just want to have my opacity and flow up to 100%, and then I can just paint a little bit of light in the inside. So if you see over here, there's like an empty circle towards the beginning. So it helps to kind of play with the lighting effects too, so that it makes it look nicer with the lighting. And so then when I'm done and I'm happy with it, I can go ahead and I can flatten my image, and I'm done. So in this image, we're going to be doing something similar to the last one with the baseball. The selection is going to be a little bit trickier than the last one. And also the other thing is that we can really imitate a fake depth of field by blurring one layer and not the other, and we can decide which one we want to do. Another option when you're making selections is to use smart objects. So you can actually see on this layer, my top layer, it's a smart object, and so here in the thumbnail I have that little sort of like a little folded piece of paper icon. And I've done that by placing the file, this layer, on top of the other one. So on the top layer, I have a picture of the boy holding the brush, and I'm going to be selecting just the brush out and knocking out the background. And then underneath, I'm going to be showing the same boy reaching for the brush so that it will look like the paintbrush is actually floating in the air in front of the boy. So you can have a lot of fun with these blurring effects as well. So up here on the paintbrush, I just want to select this paintbrush, and what I'm going to do is use some of the selection tools to get around it. So I might start with something like the magic wand tool, and I can just tap on here, and it does a pretty good selection right off the bat. But then I can also go in here, nested underneath that tool is the quick selection tool, and I want to add to the selection because I want more than what's actually chosen right now. So I'm going to select that, and then up here I see a plus symbol, and that means I'm going to add to my selection. So I can just simply sort of like paint on the selection to make it bigger, and if I select more than I want to, it's easy to toggle back and forth between the plus and the minus so that I can get rid of a little piece over here that I don't want. So definitely recommend taking your time on these kind of selections that are a little bit more difficult. And I'm going back to my minus tool again over here. And then over here I notice a little bit that I don't want down on the bottom. Once again, I did a little bit too much. Okay, and I think it looks okay, but I can always tweak it later some more. And then if I add a layer mask to it, then it's easy for me to just like paint around if I want to paint more or less off of my selection. Another strategy is to always remember to use the zoom tool, because it oftentimes is easy to forget that you have the zoom tool, but you could see a lot better if you get closer up. So now I'm using the paintbrush and I can paint on or off. So if I want to just get rid of some of this brush over here, I can do that. So some of these edges are a little bit rougher. Okay, now I still have part of this brush that got over here. I can just clean that up with my paintbrush. And then over here, he was actually holding the brush with his fingers. So I need to add a little bit more to the brush. So I'm actually going to add a new layer, and I'm going to just paint on the areas where they're missing. So now I'm actually just going to paint on with kind of like with paint. So I'm going to use the ink dropper tool so I can match the exact color. It's black, but just to make sure. And then I can just paint a little bit more here. Okay, and so now I have a pretty good paintbrush that I like. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flatten the top layers because I want to be able to select or blur just one or the other of them. So I'm going to turn the bottom layer off, and then I'm going to merge the visible layers so I can lock those two together, turn the back layer back on. And another thing I do if I just want to make sure I don't make a mistake is I can drag one layer onto the new layer button so I can just duplicate the layer in case I make a mistake. And I'm going to add a Gaussian blur just like I did with the macro version of the baseball here. So I'm going to do filter blur, and then I can do Gaussian blur. And I still want to be able to see his face, so I'm going to reduce it a little bit, and I can scooch this over just to see how I like it. And just slightly blurred here, and then I can press OK when I'm ready, and I like that effect, so it looks like it's floating. Alternatively, if I want, I can put the blur on the brush. So here on my little brush layer, I can do the filter blur and Gaussian blur on the paintbrush. So if I wanted to focus on the brush, I can do that. And I think I actually like that one a little bit better. So I can press OK, and there I'm done. And even if your selection wasn't completely perfect, the blurring will kind of mask any sort of imperfections that you have. So as you can see, you can get really creative with a lot of the blurring effects, and there's a lot of options available. We'll see what you can do with your images, so be sure that you post them to the platform. In this lesson, we're going to be taking multiple images in a sequence of a person running and blending them in together into one composition. So already in my layers palette, you see I have my pictures open, and they're stacked one on top of each other. And I've placed them as smart objects, so we're going to do non-destructive editing, so it's very easy to fix our mistakes if we don't like what we're doing. And I'm going to start from the top and work my way down. And first what I'm going to do is I'm going to mask out certain parts of my image so that I can see the images that are underneath. So as you see, each photo is a different position of the person running. So now I'm going to apply a layer mask to my top image so I can mask out and reveal the photo that is underneath. And here's my layer mask, and I'm going to choose a black brush so that I can mask off. And then I'm going to go ahead and reveal the figure underneath. So now I'm going to go ahead and, you won't be able to see it yet, but I'm going to go ahead and mask out this area behind it, so as I work on the layers beneath, it will reveal those photos as well. And I can always paint back on in the areas where I need to add it. Okay, now I'm on the next layer down. Once again, I'm going to add a layer mask. And I'm going to reveal the third photo in the sequence. And then over here, where there's a little bit that's still left, I can move back up to the top and reveal that. And then also go ahead and mask out the area behind that. So you can see in the thumbnail over there, there's a black that's showing. And then I can always toggle back to the white and fix those areas later if I want. Okay, moving on to the next layer, we repeat the same process. Making sure to select the black. And then areas, once again, that need more work, we can work up to previous layers to reveal it. toggling back and forth to white whenever I need to. And then once again, I'm going to mask out the area behind it, so it's going to reveal the one underneath. And then going and repeating the process again, adding one more layer mask. And then it's very easy to just go ahead and zoom in to certain areas that need more detailed work, and you can take your time with this because we have multiple layers stacked on top of each other. And we can use the bracket tools to go ahead and adjust the size of our brush. Okay, so you can take your time doing the masking just the way you want it, and even if it's not perfect, that's okay, because underneath the top layer, we're going to reduce the opacity slightly, so any imperfections will be hidden. So starting on the top, we're going to leave the opacity at 100%, and then the layer underneath, we're going to reduce it slightly, then going on to the next one underneath, and reduce that one a little bit more. Going down one more, reduce that one even lighter, and then the one on the bottom is locked. I can double click on it to unlock it. So this last little step is a little bit trickier because we want to maintain the opacity at 100% of the background, but we want the figure, the last figure running at a much lower opacity than the rest of it. So what we're going to do is select the figure and then paste that onto a new layer. So here on the bottom layer, and I can go ahead and duplicate that layer. Working on the top layer, I'm going to just select this much. And I can go ahead and apply a layer mask. Okay, and I'm just masking out the figure, and later on what I'm going to do is just select the inverse of that. I can go ahead and turn off the bottom layer so I can see a little bit better what I'm doing. And it doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to be having it on the top of the other layer and the opacity is going to be really low. Okay, once again, zooming in as needed. So now I've masked out this area here, and I'm going to select the inverse of this mask. So I'm going to click on my layer mask, and I can click on the invert button, and I'm going to turn back on my bottom layer so that I can see the background, and I'm going to go ahead and reduce the opacity of this. So in this last step, I have my last figure masked out, but I want to have a just solid blue sky background beneath it so that I can reduce the opacity very low. So what I'm going to do is go back up to my top layer because it has the blue sky at the end, and I'm going to duplicate it by clicking and holding down and dragging onto a new layer button. Then I'm going to pull this extra copy of the layer down to just underneath my last figure. And I don't need this layer mask here, so I'm just gonna select that and then pull that layer mask into the trash. So I just have the blue sky in the back. And then next, I'm going to take my figure and I'm gonna reduce the opacity very low. And I'm finished. So as you can see, this is a little bit more challenging. It may take you a few tries, but it takes a lot of thinking, and if you have any questions, you can post them to the platform.